Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really profound paradox. How can one single sacred text be the source for communities that are deeply, sometimes even violently divided? We're going to use a specific framework that blends developmental psychology with theology to really try and get to the bottom of this.
So let's just start with the central puzzle, one that's really at the heart of so many modern conflicts. How does it happen? How can people read the exact same words, follow the same teacher, but come to conclusions so different that they literally can't even stay in the same room, let alone the same institution? What is going on there?
And look, this isn't just some abstract theoretical question. It has very real and often painful consequences. We're seeing it play out right now in the United Methodist Church, where thousands of churches have actually split off from the main group over these intense disagreements about LGBTQ+ marriage and ordination. And it all comes back to how they interpret the very same Bible. Okay, so to really understand how these fractures happen, we're going to build our analysis in 6 steps. We'll start with the paradox itself, then look for a clue way back in the book of Deuteronomy, bring in a philosophical lens from Immanuel Kant, introduce a psychological model of consciousness, and then use that model to explain the disagreement and why people end up just talking past each other. So here's the core idea we're digging into. One book, one tradition, is effectively creating 2 completely separate faiths. We're not talking about minor disagreements here. These are fundamental differences that are tearing institutions apart. Our goal is to look at a framework that explains why this happens, to get beneath the surface arguments and look at the underlying structures of thought and spirit.
To start building this framework, we first have to get a handle on how the text itself works. And our source material points us to a really old clue hidden in plain sight in the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy.
Now, this framework proposes a really critical distinction. It suggests that Scripture isn't always trying to be a dry, objective record of what happened. A lot of the time, it's actually acting as a powerful tool for shaping a community's identity. In this view, its main job isn't just to list facts, but to answer that much deeper question: who are we? And this passage from Deuteronomy is the perfect example. Just notice the language. It's all in the first person. My father, us, we. That's not the language of a detached historian, right? This is a creed, a declaration of who this community is. It's a foundational memory that binds everyone together. So this idea of Scripture as an identity document is going to be really important as we move forward. Okay, so to build on that idea, let's switch gears and bring in a philosophical lens. We're going to turn to the work of Immanuel Kant to help us analyze the kind of rules we find in these sacred texts. So Kant helps us see a difference between 2 types of moral commands. First, there's the hypothetical imperative. This one's pretty straightforward. You do something to get something else. It's an if-then statement, all based on rewards and punishments. But then you have the categorical imperative, which is totally different. This is when you do something simply because it is the right thing to do, period. No strings attached. For Kant, that's where true morality lies. And this is so crucial because it gets at the source of our moral compass. Heteronomy is when the rules are imposed on you from the outside, by God, the church, some authority figure. But autonomy is when the law comes from within you, when you act a certain way because your own conscience has made that principle its own. For Kant, the goal of moral development is to move toward autonomy. So this brings up a huge question about the Bible, doesn't it? If this internalized autonomous morality is the higher ground, then why does so much of Scripture, especially a book like Deuteronomy, lean so heavily on heteronomy? Why is it all about, if you obey, you get blessed, if you disobey, you get cursed? Well, according to the psychological framework we're exploring, the answer is that the text is deliberately designed to be multi-layered. It's not a one-size-fits-all document. The idea is that it's built to meet people wherever they happen to be on their own developmental and spiritual journey. So, drawing on the work of psychologist and minister James Marion, our source lays out this whole progression of spiritual consciousness. It starts way back at an archaic state and moves up. But for our purposes today, the really critical jump, and the place where most modern religious conflict happens, is right there, between the mythic and the rational levels of consciousness. Let's focus on mythic consciousness first. At this stage, the world is seen in very clear black and white terms. God is understood as this powerful authority figure, literally in the sky. Scripture then is read as a divine rulebook. You just follow the instructions. This creates a very strong us versus them mentality. It's all about conformity to the group and its beliefs. It's a very dualistic way of seeing things.
But the next stage, rational consciousness, is a massive leap. This is when a person has the realization that, hey, maybe my group doesn't have a monopoly on truth. Maybe there are other valid ways of seeing the world. Morality starts to shift from external rules to your own internal principles. You become open to questioning your own beliefs. But, and this is absolutely key, you cannot be argued or taught into this stage. It has to be a shift that you realize for yourself. So now we can take this whole developmental model and lay it right on top of the schism in the Methodist Church, or any similar religious conflict, really, and you can start to see how powerful it is as an explanation. This table just lays out the divide so clearly. Someone operating from mythic consciousness reads the Bible as a literal rule book. Their morality is based on external commands. So when they encounter outsiders, the goal is either to convert them or separate from them. But someone at the rational level sees Scripture as something that needs interpretation in its context. Their morality is based on internal principles like love and justice, and the response to outsiders is to engage in dialogue. You see, they are reading the same words, but they're processing them through completely different cognitive operating systems.
So from that mythic perspective, Scripture's job is often to enforce the group's identity, to draw the line in the sand. It can even become a weapon in these theological fights, used to prove that our way is the only biblically correct way, which then justifies excluding them.
And all of this brings us to the final, and maybe the most difficult part of this whole framework, the reason why even well-intentioned dialogue so often just completely fails to solve these kinds of deep disputes.
The core insight here is that these aren't just arguments about how to interpret a few verses of the Bible. They are clashes between two profoundly different ways of seeing reality itself. The biggest barrier isn't the text, it's the level of consciousness that's filtering that text. As the source material puts it so powerfully, real communication becomes almost impossible. Both sides are using the same words, quoting the same Bible, but the meaning they attach to those words is totally different because it's coming from a different cognitive world. They are, quite literally, talking past each other. So this framework doesn't offer us an easy, simple solution. If anything, it really highlights just how deep these divisions go. And it leaves us with a really critical, maybe even unsettling question for our polarized world. If the divides aren't just about what we believe, but about the very structure of how we believe, what does it even take for a real conversation to begin?